One example I give at the individual level that I think if we change it from an individual level to a sort of public health frame, might think about how this scales is the notion of an information diet, right? I mean, people might be inclined to sort of roll their eyes at the phrase, you are what you eat, but there is some basic truth underlying that. I mean, your diet has an impact on your overall health, and that is true for individuals. It's better to eat fruits and vegetables than it is to snack on processed foods all day. That's a true thing. It's true for individuals. It has an aggregate effect, I think, at the societal level. And the same thing is true for information. If you consume a wide variety of real good information, you're more likely to develop a well-informed perspective on something. It's going to make you a better citizen. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Stephen Barnard. I'm a professor and chair of the Department of Sociology and Criminology at Butler University, and you're listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast.
You're listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for all things public health and global health, from the Sustainable Development Goals to the social determinants of health, as well as interesting dialogues about the diverse career opportunities that exist in these fields. Remember to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify so other people like you can benefit from our content. You're scrolling through social media and you see a post claiming that a common household product causes cancer. Your instincts? Share it and protect your friends. If you don't believe that is true, you might do something that's called debunking, where you maybe tell your friends that this is wrong and don't do it. But if instead of that, what if you could have immunity to manipulation before you even encounter it in the first place? In this episode, we're exploring the idea of prebunking, a revolutionary approach that builds resistance to misinformation before it spreads. From PHI Media, I'm Gordon Thane, and I'm joined by Dr. Stephen Barnard, professor and chair of sociology and criminology at Butler University, and author of Hacking Hybrid Media, who studies problematic information flows through our digital world. Now, can we really train our brains to resist misinformation? Is it possible to rebuild trust in a post-truth era? Let's find out. And so that brings us to the point now of it's sounding a bit doom and gloom. It's sounding like there's nothing that we can do about it. Regulators, Facebook, tweaking algorithm, tweaking it back. And I want to bring us to this concept of prebunking. So debunking, I think, is more familiar to people of something happened and you kind of go back in time and be like, why this is wrong, and you kind of break it apart. And then prebunking is a little bit more proactive. Could you explain what I'm talking about here with prebunking versus debunking?
There's this classic strategy for dealing with false information, and that is to sort of counter it with better information or to debunk those false narratives. And obviously that's still kind of a necessary approach, but because of all the factors that we've been talking about, and especially the fracturing of our media landscape where people get information from different places and it comes through their feeds, so they may not even seek it out. They might see it from one story. They're not going to go back to that website to get that information oftentimes. And so because of all those things, just a correction from the original source is not a sufficient sort of solution to sort of stopping the spread of bad information.
Dr. Barnard just touched on the continued influence effect, a documented phenomenon where people continue believing misinformation even after it's been debunked. Here's the scale of the problem. Human fact-checkers are literally incapable of keeping up with the volume of fake news being produced. Detection algorithms aren't 100% accurate, and they risk censorship. This is why Cambridge researchers asked, what if we could vaccinate people's minds using the inoculation theory, a psychological framework from the 1960s that builds resistance by exposing people to weakened examples of manipulation, just like how vaccines work against viruses.
There's some researchers, Sandra van der Linden and John Rosenbeek, who have published some stuff on this idea that they call prebunking, which basically means to sort of help people build up a resistance to bad information or false narratives. And that sort of comes from, sort of building on this notion of of the kind of inoculation theory. Like it seeks to expose people to small treatments of bad information, and you put that alongside context and correction, and by doing that, you can kind of help people build up some resistance to those sorts of things. And so you can do that directly through all sorts of communicative ways. Those research even worked with the team to create a bad news game that kind of helps people identify manipulative information. It puts them in the seat of someone who is getting ready to spread disinformation, and sort of shows them.
Okay.
It shows them
as an actor and not necessarily. Okay.
Yeah.
The bad news game that Dr. Barnard mentions has real data behind it. Developed by Cambridge University with Dutch media literacy organizations like DROG, over 500,000 people have played it. When researchers tested 15,000 participants, they found players significantly downgraded the reliability of fake headlines after playing. And this worked across age, political ideology, and education levels. The game teaches 6 common misinformation strategies, including polarization, conspiracy theories, and emotional manipulation. Cambridge then created 90-second videos using examples from Family Guy and Star Wars that are completely source agnostic, meaning they make no claims about truth, just teach manipulation techniques.
It's a pretty provocative approach. I've had students play this game as an exercise in class and us talk about it. And I remember there's kind of an uproar sometimes of like, wait a minute, they're teaching me how to be a propagandist and to do it in ways that are manipulating people online. Is that really something that we want to learn how to do? Right. But I think that their motivation is to say, we're going to show you how manipulation or how some forms of manipulation work. And if you can kind of peel back the curtain and see what's happening back there, then you are less susceptible to be tricked by it because you understand what's happening behind the curtain. It's like, the magician having that sort of distraction where something's happening behind their back as they're trying to draw attention somewhere else. And so if you know to look behind the back and to pay attention to what's happening back there, then you're more likely to find out. I'm not trying to kill people's enjoyment of a magic trick, but if it's a matter of public health or of their own individual health, then it probably is better for them to be looking more critically and with their eyes open about what's happening there.
So it sounds cool, but does it actually work? Like in the way we define in interventions and the level of effectiveness, does this stuff work, or is it just like a cool gimmick?
It certainly isn't a complete solution to the problem of bad information, because as we've been talking about, there are so many other factors that lead people to believe or not believe something. If someone's identity is committed to the belief in holistic health or in certain types of issues and perspectives, then trying to teach them about how they're being manipulated is probably not going to be effective. For issues that people are not very informed about or not very committed to, I think it has a greater chance of success. The less political or the less invested people are in those issues, I think it probably that is their knowledge base is less. I think it probably has a greater chance of success because they don't necessarily know much or anything at all about that topic. And so giving them a foundation of knowledge or a toolkit for how to suss out what might be trustworthy information on that topic is probably a useful approach, but it has to go alongside other things. And so the sort of traditional forms of literacy and media literacy are essential. I mean, people need to be asking, where is this information coming from? What are the sources underlying it? What are their motivations? Those are all, I think, questions that every person should be asking. And I think that's a key piece of it. But there's lots of other things I think society and different entities in society can be doing to try to sort of beef up people's resilience and resistance to bad information.
Right.
It can't just be, we can't all just be pre-bunked. That's sort of what our education system has been trying to do, and still it has not been effective at that.
I liked how you break it down, because I think in the article the authors talked about, and you mentioned some of them already, about tweaking the algorithm, the media literacy, the regulations on media platforms about the information that they can disseminate. And no one solution in of itself is a viable solution to the challenge of misinformation. And together, maybe you're able to get somewhere. How do misinformation interventions, whether it's prebunking or the other components, how do those scale, especially in light of those limitations that you mentioned about the prebunking methodology working well in certain cases, depending on your underlying belief systems and how relevant a particular issue is to you? Like, how viable are the solutions that we currently have in a way that's scalable?
Well, I would say one of the main limitations of it is the sort of information system more broadly, which again, I mean, as a sociologist, we can look at individuals. I'm also often going to think about at the structural level what's happening and what solutions, as you're pointing to, may or may not scale effectively. So, we can think certainly, I mean, one example I give at the individual level that I think if we change it from an individual level to a sort of public health frame, might think about how this scales is the notion of an information diet, right? I mean, people might be inclined to sort of roll their eyes at the phrase, you are what you eat, but there's some basic truth underlying that. I mean, your diet has an impact on your overall health, and that is true for individuals. It's better to eat fruits and vegetables than it is to snack on processed foods all day. That's a true thing. It's true for individuals. It has an aggregate effect, I think, at the societal level. And the same thing is true for information. If you consume a wide variety of real, good information, you're more likely to develop a well-informed perspective on something. It's going to make you a better citizen.
Here's the breakthrough on scale. Researchers partnered with Google's Jigsaw unit for the first real-world field study of inoculation theory on social media. They exposed 5.4 million US YouTubers to inoculation videos, with almost 1 million watching for at least 30 seconds. The result? A 5% increase in the ability to recognize manipulation techniques. Doesn't sound like a lot, but to put that into context, increases in brand awareness from YouTube advertising typically max out at about 1%. This means that the inoculation videos were about 5 times more effective. And this was just for 5 cents per meaningful view. Google is already working to implement this, rolling out prebunking campaigns in Poland, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic to get ahead of disinformation about Ukrainian refugees.
Whether we're talking about policy or health or another issue. So I think individually people should be asking themselves those questions we're talking about motivations and expertise and those sorts of things. And that's something that every individual can do that can scale, that can make a macro level effect on the whole. But I think if we're talking about that sort of larger level, macro level view, the problem, as you're sort of talking about, is one of the things I get into in the conclusion of my latest book, Hacking Hybrid Media. I talk about this challenge where, as we were putting it, on the one hand, you have good information, and the other thing, you have bad information. So you have people who are trying to flood the zone with bad information. And so the tendency traditionally is to flood the zone with good information. But for various reasons, that doesn't necessarily convince everyone to just then believe the good information and ignore or stop trusting the bad. It may actually be more likely to have an effect of just making people not know what to trust at all and lead to this environment where truth can't be had and a sort of nihilism takes hold overall. And that's a very scary place for society to be.
Dr. Barnard's concern about information overload can have deadly stakes. In 2018, more than 20 people were killed in India due to rumors about child abduction spreading on WhatsApp. Now, there are 4 traditional approaches to fighting misinformation, and researchers
have shown that they're all inadequate to some degree. Tweaking algorithms risks censorship and isn't accurate. New legislation is difficult to enforce. Fact-checking can't scale. And media literacy education becomes outdated as manipulation tactics evolve. The elderly, who are the most vulnerable to spreading fake news, aren't in education systems. But here's what works. The Cambridge team found that inoculated users maintained their improved detection skills around 18 hours after viewing. They became more discerning, but not more skeptical.
And so, it got me thinking an awful lot about what are some of the ways that we can scale solutions to try to avoid and minimize the effect of just kind of leading to this, what some people have called the kind of post-truth era, where truth is unknown. That's I think a worst case scenario. And so I think one of the ways to get there, I mentioned trust earlier, and the sort of the phenomenon, the problem, the importance, I should say, of trust in institutions generally, in institutions that we might call transpartisan. They sort of exist beyond any partisan entity. That trust in those institutions, which in many countries has been declining, and in the U.S. is at an all-time low, that is an absolutely fundamental problem that I think is also fundamental to the solution, which is to say we have to start working on ways to rebuild trust. And so if we're looking at, let's say, the medical and health professions, medical professionals can find ways to relate to their patients and can listen to their concern. Telling someone that something is true isn't necessarily effective if they don't believe it. But if they're able to kind of close that social distance between, the professional and the people they're serving, making people feel respected and cared for, then over time they're more likely to open their ears and hopefully their minds to the things that they might be hearing from them. I think the same is true for public health professionals, right? If they're more likely to, focus on communication and relationship building, that can go a long way into helping to kind of build trust back on all sorts of other issues. So getting into the communities locally, being there for people on bread and butter issues. It may not be the one that's getting the news or that's going viral, but it's affecting them. And if you can be a trusted source for those sorts of things, and that might end up, sort of earning over time a greater sense of trust in them when it comes to some of these other more politicized issues.
Dr. Barnard shows us that fighting misinformation isn't just about facts. It's about relationships, trust, and understanding how our psychology can be weaponized. Prebunking offers hope, but the real solution requires rebuilding trust through consistent action and genuine connection. This show was edited by me, Gordon Thane, with additional editing from LaShawn Benedict. Sound design and mixing by myself and LaShawn Benedict. The original music from The Music Room, composed by Tom Fox, licensed from Johnny Harris. The cover art design for our show by LaShawn Benedict. The Public Health Insight podcast is produced by PHI Media.
Thank you for listening to the Public Health Insight podcast, your go-to space for informative conversations, inspiring community action. If you enjoy our podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. See you in the next one.